Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And this is a wonderful conference. I'm learning so much, and I feel I am part of a community that is grounded in hope and in resilience. And I'm really grateful to be here. So I'm going to start by going to share my screen with you. And what I want to, so I am a neuroscientist by training with a background in cellular and clinical neurobiology, and I also have a degree in philosophy. And what I do is I work on the impact of stress on students' ability to be self-aware, to engage in metacognition, and also in and to be able to learn. And some of the work or what I'm going to talk about is based on primary research that I won't present, but I want to share with you that comes from not just college students, but also secondary students. And so at my institution, we have students who are dual enrolled. So those are adolescents who are still in high school, who take courses at the college. And so I want to start by saying that it's really important to note that before COVID-19 and before the all of the trauma that we are experiencing, there was anxiety and stress and trauma that the students were experiencing. And this is documented among college students, among secondary school students, and at some point, even researchers have described it as a pandemic. The World Health Organization did a massive study in 2018 where they looked at before getting to college students' mental health, and 33% at least had experienced some form of mental health. And this is coming from 14 countries. The United Kingdom is one of those countries. And so definitely we had a problem before this pandemic. And I think I think it's unfortunate that we were not looking through a trauma-informed lens, at least in higher education, when it came to instructions. And I think right now, it's that the situation is even more dire, and it's important that we do that. So the question for me is, what does the pandemics, and I say pandemics because I like how one of the speakers said that there is a pandemic of apathy, there's a pandemic of racism and inequity. So what do those realities mean for our students' ability to learn? Well, as a neuroscientist, I could tell you, and I think a lot of you educators know already, that stress impacts our ability to learn. And you know, this is a recent article showing that it's not just the ability to acquire new information, but the ability to reconstruct something that we already learned. And what I want to remind us here is that what we're going through and what students and young people are going through is not a typical stress, it's a traumatic stress. And this traumatic stress can really impair our ability to just be. And what I also want to share with you is that the brain is also incredibly plastic, and we could negotiate with the brain, if you will, to turn the attention or to be able to learn and thrive. And so when I say the word trauma here, I'm going to use this definition of trauma, very straightforward. Robert Squire, who is a traumatologist, says that it's any negative event that occurs and it leaves us in a position of helplessness. Now, you and I, we're adults and we can articulate those feelings, and a lot of times it's difficult for children to articulate, so it makes it even more difficult for them to process that information. It's all about the brain. The key to defining any experience that we encounter, it lies in the nervous system and not so much the event itself. And it lies in the way the nervous system is going to interpret that event. And so what I mean by this is, just very briefly, the brain has three major parts, and those major parts are involved in either emotions or our instinct to survive, the reptilian brain, and then there is a neocortex involved in reason and rationale. Now, what we know about young children is that the different parts of the brain are, some of them are more and less developed. And so this part that is shown in blue, the cortical region, is not fully developed. What that means is the synaptic connections are not fully there until mid-20s. And so this is going to matter when it comes to processing information. So speaking of processing information, the way we process information is that there is a stimulus that goes to the brain, and it goes to the emotional part of the brain first and foremost. This happens in adults, it happens in children. And what happens there is we're making the interpretation whether this is safe or dangerous. And if it's dangerous, we're going to disengage. And if it's safe, we will engage. And so we feel, and then we assign meaning, then we act. And it's really important to keep in mind that, well, for young children, this is a busy slide. And what I'm trying to demonstrate with this slide, I'm going to go through it, is this is showing you the scans of brains, right? And it's showing that, I'm going to start right here. This is a younger, this is a 5-year-old brain, and this is a 20-year-old brain, right? And you see that the activity changes. And so we see that the blue right here is showing that there is more synaptic connection, or there's more maturity. So what this is saying is that for a 5-year-old, the emotional part of the brain is more developed than the rational part of the brain. And what this means is that when I go back to this right here, let's go back. When I go back, there's a lot of emotional processing that's happening, and the filter to put the rational on there is not always there, which is why sometimes when a child has a tantrum, they're actually scared because they don't understand why they are acting this way, which is really important to help that child feel safe even when they are having a tantrum. So knowing what we know about the brain, we know that when we interpret something as threatening or harmful or uncertain, right? And so, for example, if a child sees that the mom or the dad or the caregiver is distressed, but they don't know why, that becomes very stressful on the brain, because uncertainty is really just, the brain does not like uncertainty. It fills in the gap, and usually when it fills in those gaps, they're not going to be positive. They're going to be more negative. So I want to talk about a structure in the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is a beautiful structure that helps us, it helps with emotions, and it helps with, it helps us interpret information. But what happens if the amygdala is overactive? We have what's called an amygdala hijack. And what this means, this is a structure which is part of the emotional part of the brain. This structure is going to release it's going to cause chemicals to be released, stress hormones, and those stress hormones are going to put us into fight or flight. And this fight or flight is really energetically exhausting, because it's basically, we're always waiting to run so we could stay alive. And what that means for learning, we know that when we are in that state, it's going to impact our ability to pay attention, our ability to make decisions about learning, to learn, to remember, and we're always going to be in this fight or flight. Again, it's very energetically demanding. So what's really important when we work with children, when we work with adolescents, with students, and even with teachers, we don't just get over this and go on as business as usual. There is a disruption in the homeostasis in the brain between the social, between the emotional and the rational, and that disruption requires an intervention. And what I want to offer you today is what are some of those interventions that we can engage in. And so I asked, what can we do to help our students recognize and mitigate the stress, the anxiety, so they could continue to learn and thrive. And when I say this, when I talk to my colleagues, I say, do this with your kids also. So it's not just for the teacher, it's also for the parents. And so I am urging educators that we use a trauma-informed lens when we work with students, and whether you are homeschooling your children or whether you are working with children online. And this means is that we pay attention to, we pay attention to the trauma that we're experiencing, so we could recognize it in others. And so we want to offer safe environments. We want to really cultivate connectedness, help young people feel empowered so we could recover. So I'm going to offer a few suggestions that have been really guided by my work with my students. Safety is really important, and I think it's really important that we don't assume just what safety means to us, that we communicate with the children to figure out what makes them feel safe. So here I say communicate and invite conversations. And what I mean by invite conversations, sometimes it's really difficult for children to articulate what's happening. I was speaking with my with a young middle school child who just was having a tantrum, and I was having a conversation, and I said, "Why did you do it?" And she said, "I don't know." And after 20 minutes had passed, she was able to articulate that she didn't know why she was having a tantrum. And then when she realized she was having a tantrum, she didn't know how to stop. And so there are tools we could give them to articulate these things so they could start to self-regulate. It's important to ask and be very, very, very transparent about the question. So how are you doing? Do you miss your friends? Are you scared? How is your family doing? And this is what this is going to do at the subconscious level. It reinforces the connectedness. It reinforces the notion that you are seeing them and that they matter. So safety is really important. And again, it's not just the physical safety, the emotional, the psychological, and the interpersonal safety. And I think it's also important to say, do you feel safe? Are you scared? Trust is really important. So trust, acknowledging, so I say acknowledge and normalize that the present situation is difficult. One of the speakers earlier said that she speaks with her children and says, "Mommy has to work on the weekend. This is difficult. And so say that you miss your friends, for example. I think it's also important to talk about with the children what's happening in the brain and why they behave certain way and what can they do about it. So this is a book that says Hello Brain, and it's empowering the children to understand what's going on inside their head. It's also important not to just dump it on the children and say, yes, it's so overwhelming and so on, but also to tell stories of how you get through it, to model regulation, if you will. The other theme is agency. This is really important. So part of when we go to school, whether we're adults or children or adolescents, we have agencies. And it also helps us shape our identity. And a lot of times right now that has been taken away. And so how do we give agencies to young children, to adolescents? again, conversations and validate and normalize their concern. And so give them a voice, and also ask them whether you are working with them at home or via or online. How can I explain this better? Or how can I make this experience better? And what this is doing is it's engaging their creative part of the brain, which is really, really critical to the healing process. So structure is really important, and I say kind structure. Rigidity can be also overwhelming, and so I'm careful not to say flexible structure, because it could be confusing. So I say kind structure when you're working with children. And so it's important to like spell out what is required to complete the task and why it matters. Because right now, when the brain is in this fight or flight, the brain, and a lot of times it's subconscious, it's this: why should I put my energy into this? Is this going to help me survive or not? So it's important to articulate to the students why this is important. Use multiple ways to demonstrate the structure of something. Use infographics, use pictures. And I talk about imagination and play. The brain thrives when it is in a creative mode, when it's playing, when it's imagining. So I think right now it's really important that, in addition to what I said, that we engage the brain, the children's brain, in creating. So I say beautify and enchant your course or your whatever activity you are doing with the children. So for example, ask them, what is your favorite poem? Write one or create something. Ask the student, how can I make this more fun? How could I make it more beautiful? And I think it's also really important to invite them to look to the future. And so perhaps you could have a project where you ask them to, if you were to build a better world with you in it, what would it look like, right? And have this be an ongoing project, and have them co-create with their classmates, something like that. And I say there is more. And what I mean by there is more, so I did research between 2017 and 2019 where I did interviews with over 1,000 students, and they came from universities, from college, from high school. And part of the interview question was, what is an optimal learning environment? And overwhelmingly, it doesn't matter what their major was. It doesn't matter which background they had. It didn't matter whether they were in high school or overwhelmingly, they talked about relationships, and that they wanted to have a relationship, not just with a classmate and with a teacher, but also they wanted to have a sense of meaning, and also connection to the knowledge. So what I say is that right now it's really important to be intentional about bringing in hope. And we use hope to negotiate despair and to create meaning together. And I want to share with you a drawing that a student did, where he said, I imagine myself as in the classroom as this person, and I have a relationship, a two-way relationship with my classmate and with the teacher, and I also have a relationship with the world. And it's really important how I think he described that the relationship to knowledge, what I'm learning, and to the unknown. And he said that the fostering a relationship with ambiguity and the unknown as a source of knowing more. And he beautifully said that all of those relationships help me shape a relationship with myself. And so I think right now, again, I go back to for the adults, that we could use hope to negotiate this sense of anxiety and despair. And it's that hope that can drive us to create meaning. And this meaning, we create those together inside the house, and also with our teachers and classmates. And with that, I will end